night. Long kiss, broad daylight, I'm off you on switch. Not too bright, good night. Long kiss.
What's up, slackers? Welcome to Book Cheats. Today's featured tie is a blue king-size tie. If you have any suggestions for my next tie, please leave a comment, and who knows, I might wear that tie. Today we'll be discussing The Great Gatsby Chapter 2. At the beginning of this chapter, Nick takes a train with Tom Buchanan into New York City. When they get to Queens, Tom tells Nick that they're going to stop and get off here. Tom wants Nick to meet his mistress. Nick describes Queens as this sort of wasteland where there's smoke everywhere. Nick wanted to see who Tom's mistress was, but he didn't want to meet her. Nick and Tom walk through Queens, and they eventually come on this old beat-up auto shop, next to a bunch of places with for rent signs. Tom leads Nick inside the building, and Nick and Tom meet the owner. The owner's name is George Wilson. Nick describes George Wilson as being this blonde, spiritless guy who's sort of handsome and has lost a lot of hope in life. George Wilson asks Tom about a car he promised to sell him. Tom gets defensive and says that if he keeps bugging him about it, that he's going to sell it to somebody else. Just then, George's wife comes down the stairs. Nick describes George's wife as a thick woman in her 30s, but had a sensuality about her. George's wife comes down the stairs and tells George to grab some chairs so they can sit down. While George is off getting chairs, Tom leans into George's wife, and he tells her that he's been wanting to see her. And he tells her that he'll meet her by the newsstand at the lower level. Nick and Tom go to the designated meeting spot. As they are waiting, a man named Dr. Elkberg and Tom are talking. They talk about how terrible a place Queens is. And Dr. Eckelberg talks about how good it is that George's wife gets out. Dr. Eckelberg asks why George doesn't complain about their relationship. Tom says that George is too dumb and that he doesn't even realize it. He thinks that his wife is with her sister whenever she leaves. Mrs. Wilson arrives, and they take separate taxis so that nobody will suspect anything who knows her in Queens. Mrs. Wilson is a really snobbish brat and buys a bunch of things and complains to Tom and makes him get her a puppy on the way to their cheating apartment.
Please, can I have it? Please, can I have it?
They pay $10 for the dog. The whole time Nick has been on this trip, he's been trying to get away, and he tells Tom that he needs to go. Tom insists that Nick comes up to the apartment and hangs out, and it is here where we learn the name of Tom's mistress. Her name is Myrtle. Myrtle tells Nick that she'll call her sister, who's really pretty, to come hang out too. So they head up to the apartment. The apartment was small with very little decorations. As soon as they get inside, Tom grabs a bottle of whiskey, and Nick says this is the second time in his life that he ever got drunk. He says from the whole evening it was really hazy because he was drunk, but he remembers some of the details. The first thing he remembers is that Catherine, Myrtle's sister, joins them in the apartment. He describes Catherine as being a slender, red-haired, worldly woman who jingles as she walks because she wears so much jewelry. Next into the apartment came Mr. and Mrs. Mckee. Mr. Mckee was a photographer who's described as being feminine for being a man. Mrs. Mckee is described as being super annoying, and Nick describes her as being a bit of a slob. As their little party goes on, Mrs. Mckee is super noisy. Mrs. Mckee talks about how Mr. Mckee has taken 127 pictures of her since they've been married, and has Mr. Mckee take a picture of her while they're at the party. Catherine sits down next to Nick and they begin to talk. When she finds out that Nick is from the West Egg, she tells him she went to a Gatsby party a month ago. And she says she thinks that Gatsby inherited the money from a guy named Caspar Wilhelm. She also says that she's scared of him. Catherine says that neither Tom nor Myrtle can stand their spouses. Catherine says that if she was Myrtle, she would divorce George and marry Tom. Catherine also says that the reason why they don't get married is because Daisy is supposedly Catholic and the Catholic Church doesn't believe in divorce. The thing is that Nick knows that Daisy isn't Catholic and he wonders why they would lie about this. Catherine says that when they do eventually get married, they're going to head to the West Coast and wait till things blow over for a while. Nick suggests that they go to Europe. Catherine changes the subject and says that she almost married this pansy guy who was constantly chasing after her, but she met a guy named Chester who quote, saved her from marrying this guy. Myrtle joins in on their conversation and says that she wished she was as smart as Catherine. And she says that she married George because she thought he knew a lot about breeding. But when she married him, she found out he was a big phony and had zero ambitions. She says that George was so lazy that he had to borrow some guy's suit just so they could get married. Nick kept trying to leave, but every time he would try to leave, he said they would start up a conversation. He felt like he was tied to the chair with rope.
Oh, why don't you stay a little while?
Okay. Myrtle told the story of how Tom and she met. They were both on the train, and Tom was really well dressed. Myrtle couldn't stop staring at him. They took the same cab, and they clicked right off the bat. Hours passed, and the drinking continued. Myrtle and Tom got into an argument. Tom said that Myrtle had no right to use Daisy's name. Myrtle kept repeating Daisy, and said that she had every right in the world to say the name Daisy. Tom made a short movement, and with an open hand, broke Myrtle's nose.
Daisy, Daisy, Daisy.
The bathroom was filled with bloody towels, and as the commotion rang out, Nick and Mr. Mckee snuck out of the apartment. As Nick and Mr. Mckee were riding down the elevator, Mr. Mckee invited Nick over for lunch sometime. Nick gladly accepted, and the next morning, Nick woke up in Pennsylvania Station. And that concludes the chapter. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions from your homework, leave a comment down below and I'll get to it as soon as I can. You guys have an awesome day and slack on.